If you want to understand why Jesus was killed, you have to separate the historical question from the theological one. From a historical perspective, Jesus was executed by the Roman authorities, probably around 30 CE, during the governorship of Pontius Pilate. The Gospels also describe serious conflict between Jesus and certain religious authorities in Jerusalem, but saying simply, "The church killed Jesus," is historically misleading. There was no Christian church yet. Christianity emerged after Jesus' death. The people involved were Jewish religious authorities, the Roman government, and a particular political and religious situation in Jerusalem. So what actually happened? Jesus had become a powerful public figure. He preached about the kingdom of God, challenged hypocrisy among religious leaders, healed people, gathered followers, and attracted large crowds. His message was not simply about being a nicer person. He was announcing that God's kingdom was arriving and that people's relationship with God mattered more than religious status, wealth, or political power. That became dangerous in several ways. First, Jesus challenged the authority of religious leaders. The temple in Jerusalem was the center of Jewish religious life. It was also deeply connected to the political and economic structure of Jerusalem. Priests, temple officials, merchants, and other powerful groups operated within that system. Jesus publicly criticized religious hypocrisy and confronted people conducting business in the temple. The famous incident, commonly called the cleansing of the temple, is especially important. According to the Gospels, Jesus entered the temple, overturned tables, drove out merchants, and accused those involved of turning God's house into a marketplace. Whether every detail of the Gospel account happened exactly as described is debated by historians, but the basic story makes sense in its historical setting. A public figure entering the temple during Passover, surrounded by huge crowds, and symbolically attacking the temple establishment could be interpreted as a serious threat. And then there was the political problem. Jerusalem during Passover was a pressure cooker. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims could gather in the city. Passover itself celebrated the liberation of the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. The Romans knew that religious gatherings could quickly become political demonstrations. Rome had conquered Judea and maintained control through military force, taxation, and local political cooperation. The Romans were especially concerned about anyone who could inspire a popular uprising. And Jesus was being called, or at least associated with, titles such as Messiah and King of the Jews. That phrase was explosive. The Romans did not care very much whether someone claimed to be a theological teacher. But if someone appeared to be a king challenging Roman authority, that was another matter entirely. This is one reason the charge placed above Jesus during his crucifixion is so important. King of the Jews. Crucifixion was a Roman punishment, particularly associated with slaves, rebels, criminals, and people considered threats to Roman order. So Rome did not crucify Jesus because Christianity was bad. Christianity didn't even exist as a separate religion yet. Rome crucified Jesus because the authorities could perceive him as a potential political threat. But where did the Jewish religious authorities fit into this? The Gospel accounts describe certain members of the Jerusalem religious leadership as believing Jesus was dangerous. They had their own reasons. Jesus challenged their authority. He publicly criticized religious hypocrisy. He disrupted the temple. He attracted followers. And he spoke with extraordinary authority about God's kingdom, forgiveness, judgment, and his own role in God's plan. For some leaders, Jesus could have appeared not merely eccentric but dangerously destabilizing. There was also the question of blasphemy. In the Gospel of John, Jesus makes statements about his relationship with God that his opponents interpret as making himself equal with God. In the Synoptic Gospels, The confrontation becomes especially intense around Jesus' identity and claims. But there is an important historical distinction here. The Jewish authorities did not have the same power over crucifixion that Rome possessed. Roman authorities controlled the machinery of execution. That means the simplest historical explanation is not, the Jews killed Jesus. It is more complicated. Certain Jewish leaders opposed Jesus and may have played a role in bringing him before Roman authorities, while Pontius Pilate ultimately had the authority to order the execution. And Pilate had a reputation for being willing to use force. The crucifixion therefore makes the most sense as the collision of three things: Jesus' religious message, the interests of Jerusalem's religious and political establishment, and Rome's obsession with preventing rebellion. Jesus represented a kingdom that he said was not built on the normal machinery of worldly power. But Rome couldn't afford to gamble on whether that message would remain peaceful. And the religious establishment couldn't necessarily afford to ignore someone publicly challenging its authority during one of the most politically sensitive periods of the year. So Jesus was arrested. He was interrogated. He was brought before Roman authority. And Pilate ultimately authorized his crucifixion. There is also a deeper theological layer. The earliest Christians came to believe that Jesus' death was not merely a political execution. They believed his death was part of God's plan for redemption. In Christian theology, Jesus willingly accepted death, and his resurrection transformed the meaning of the crucifixion. That is why Christians eventually interpreted the cross not simply as the place where a political dissident died, but as the central symbol of salvation. And there is an extraordinary irony here. The Romans intended crucifixion to humiliate and destroy a person. Instead, according to Christianity, the execution of Jesus became the event around which an entirely new religious movement formed. The empire attempted to eliminate a perceived threat. Instead, Christianity spread throughout the Roman world. So if we ask, who killed Jesus, the historically responsible answer is, Jesus was executed by Roman authority under Pontius Pilate, in a situation where opposition from certain Jerusalem religious leaders and the political tensions surrounding his movement contributed to his arrest and prosecution. And if we ask, why did they kill him? The answer is even more interesting. Because Jesus challenged authority, threatened established interests, attracted crowds, spoke about God's kingdom, and was associated with the idea of kingship in a province where Rome had absolutely no patience for competing kings. The cross was meant to end the story. Instead, it became the beginning of Christianity.